The first thing the gardener said to the widow was enough to make her slam the gate. "I've been looking for you." Those 5 words sent a chill through Eleanor's body. She hadn't spoken to a stranger in months. She certainly hadn't expected one to appear on the morning she was preparing to sell the only home she and her late husband had ever shared. The man stood quietly outside the rusted iron gate, holding a small leather bag of gardening tools instead of flowers. "I'm sorry," he said gently. "I think your roses are dying." Eleanor stared at him. Her roses? She almost laughed. Nothing had bloomed in that garden since her husband, Thomas, passed away 3 years earlier. The roses had become as lifeless as the woman who watered them every morning, out of habit instead of hope. "You have the wrong house," she replied coldly before closing the gate. But as she turned away, the stranger spoke once more. "Your husband planted those roses for someone he believed would smile forever." Eleanor froze. Very few people knew that. For 3 years, Eleanor had lived alone in the old countryside cottage. The village respected her. Some believed she was still grieving. Others whispered she simply preferred loneliness. Neither was entirely true. Loneliness had never been a choice. It had simply become the only companion that never left. Every evening, she placed 2 cups on the kitchen table before realizing there was only one person left to drink tea. Every Sunday, she visited Thomas's grave carrying fresh white lilies. Every birthday, she baked his favorite apple pie, even though no one came to eat it. Life had become repetition without purpose, until the gardener appeared. The next morning, Eleanor found him kneeling outside her fence. He wasn't waiting for her. He was pulling weeds growing along the roadside. "You again?" she asked. He smiled without looking up. "My name is Daniel." "I didn't ask." "I know." There was something strangely peaceful about him. His hands were rough with years of work, but his smile carried no arrogance, only kindness. "I'm leaving tomorrow," Eleanor said. "I'm selling this place." Daniel nodded. "I heard." "Then why bother cleaning around it?" He stood and brushed dirt from his gloves. "Because beautiful things deserve one last chance." Those words lingered in Eleanor's heart long after he walked away. Days passed. The house still hadn't sold. Rain delayed buyers. Storms flooded the nearby roads. Meanwhile, Daniel appeared almost every morning. Sometimes he trimmed bushes. Sometimes he repaired broken flower beds. Sometimes he simply sat beneath the old apple tree reading a worn-out novel. He never entered the house. He never asked for payment. He never crossed the invisible wall Eleanor had built around herself. Little by little, she stopped closing the curtains when she saw him. Then one afternoon she surprised herself. "Would you like some tea?" Daniel smiled. "I thought you'd never ask." Tea became a daily tradition. Then came conversations. She learned Daniel had once owned the largest flower nursery in the county. He had been married too. His wife, Margaret, had died from cancer 7 years earlier. "I spent 2 years angry at the world," he admitted. "What changed?" "A little sunflower." She laughed for the first time in years. "A sunflower? My wife planted seeds before she passed away. I ignored them. One morning they bloomed anyway." He looked toward Eleanor's neglected garden. "That's when I realized life keeps growing, whether we're ready or not." Weeks turned into months. The garden transformed. Dead roses bloomed crimson once more. Lavender returned. Butterflies visited again. Neighbors slowed their walks just to admire the colors. People whispered, "The widow is smiling again." Children waved when passing her gate. She waved back. For the first time since Thomas died, the cottage felt alive. Yet Eleanor couldn't ignore the guilt growing inside her. One evening, she visited Thomas's grave. "I'm sorry," she whispered through tears. "I don't know if I'm betraying you." The wind rustled through nearby trees. A single white feather landed beside the headstone. She picked it up slowly. Thomas had always joked that feathers were heaven's way of saying everything would be all right. She smiled through her tears. The following week, Daniel stopped coming. 1 day, 2 days, 5 days. The silence returned. Eleanor tried convincing herself it didn't matter. But every morning, she found herself looking toward the gate. Nothing. Finally, she walked to the village. The nursery where Daniel volunteered was closed. An elderly shopkeeper looked at her sadly. "He's at the hospital." Her heart dropped. Daniel lay asleep beside a hospital window. His face looked pale, his hands trembled. When he opened his eyes, surprise filled them. "Eleanor, you disappeared. I didn't want you worrying." "Too late." He smiled weakly. "It's only my heart." Doctors had discovered a serious condition. Surgery was risky. There were no guarantees. Eleanor sat beside him for hours without speaking. Before leaving, she placed something in his hand, a tiny packet of sunflower seeds. He looked at her, confused. She smiled. "I think beautiful things deserve another chance." Daniel laughed despite the pain. "You remembered." "I remember everything." The surgery lasted 7 hours. They felt like 7 years. Eleanor waited alone in the hospital chapel. She prayed harder than she had prayed in decades. Finally, a surgeon approached. The operation was successful. Her knees nearly gave way. She cried openly, not from sadness. From relief. Recovery was slow. Daniel couldn't work in the garden for months. So Eleanor became the gardener. She watered roses, trimmed hedges, pulled weeds, planted sunflowers beside the apple tree. Every evening she carried fresh flowers to his hospital room. He teased her. "You've become better than me." "I had a good teacher." Spring arrived. The apple tree exploded with blossoms. The roses covered the fence in brilliant colors. Sunflowers reached toward the sky. The village organized its annual spring festival in Eleanor's garden. Children laughed beneath the blooming branches. Music floated through the warm evening air. Daniel stood beneath the apple tree, holding a small wooden box. "Eleanor." She turned. He opened the box. Inside rested a simple silver ring shaped like intertwining vines. "I know neither of us expected to love again." Her eyes filled with tears. "I loved Margaret deeply, and I will always love Thomas." Daniel nodded. "So we won't replace them. We'll honor them." Together, the entire garden fell silent. Eleanor looked around, at the roses Thomas had planted, at the sunflowers Margaret had inspired, at the apple tree that had witnessed both heartbreak and healing. Then she looked back at Daniel. "I thought my story ended 3 years ago." He gently took her hand. "No, it was only waiting for spring." She smiled through tears. "Yes." The crowd erupted into applause as petals drifted from the apple, tree-like blessings from heaven. And for the first time in many years, Eleanor understood something Thomas had once told her while planting that very tree. Love isn't a season that ends. It's a garden that blooms again, when someone is brave enough to tend it. From that day on, the lonely widow was never lonely again. Every spring, visitors admired the beautiful garden and asked how it became so full of life. Eleanor would simply smile, squeeze Daniel's hand, because even the most broken hearts can bloom again. If someone is willing to plant hope,